Hey everybody, and welcome to the first ever episode of Under the Covers. My name is Garrett, and in this series we'll be looking at some of the very best video game magazine cover stories that I've read. As a semi-professional video game writer myself, these stories really affected me when I was a kid. So I thought it'd be fitting to do the first ever magazine that I have ever bought, and that is Electronic Gaming Monthly, Lord of the Rings. This is the December 2003 edition, and as you can see, it's the supersized issue. Now, back when I bought it, I wasn't aware that supersized meant it just had 4 times the ads in it, but I loved it anyway. I must have read this thing at least 50 times cover to cover. But enough reminiscing. Let's get right into it. It should go without saying that this is the sequel to the Lord of the Rings The Two Towers game that was released just a year earlier, but Return of the King is actually just the second Lord of the Rings game developed by EA. The game that was titled Fellowship of the Ring was produced by Vivendi under their Black Label Games brand, and was released just a month before EA's Two Towers game, which in itself had scenes from the Fellowship film. This little licensing snafu actually stems from a dispute wherein Vivendi gained the rights to use Tolkien's written works, and EA managed to gain the Lord of the Rings film rights from New Line Cinema. This meant that Vivendi had intended to go head-to-head with EA's film-based games with their own titles that followed directly in the footsteps of the novels. This, however, proved to be a terrible idea, as the first movie-based game, The Two Towers, was not only more critically acclaimed than the first novel-based game, which was Fellowship of the Ring, but also outsold it by nearly 3 million copies. So for every 1 copy of Fellowship of the Ring, 4 copies of the EA Two Towers game was sold. Vivendi was beat down so hard right out of the gate that they restructured their release schedule by renaming their own Two Towers game to The Treason of Isengard, before ultimately scrapping it and the potential Return of the King sequel due to it, and I quote, not shaping up as strongly as anticipated and would likely not satisfy the expectations of Tolkien fans. Translation: EA ate our lunch so hard we are bleeding money trying to compete. However, despite that utter defeat, Vivendi was still able to release their adaptations of The Hobbit and Christopher Tolkien's War of the Ring, both of which, oddly enough, have featured advertisements in this very magazine. With EA's Two Towers adaptation being a critical darling and crushing the Lord of the Rings competition in sales, the ball was entirely in their court with their take on the Lord of the Rings penultimate chapter. This led to EA facing a problem as old as time. How do you follow up to that hot of a start? According to this fine cover story written by Crispin Boyer of EGM, EA had sent members of their team to the Lord of the Rings set in New Zealand in order to collect over 200,000 of the best assets to use in the game. The producer of the Return of the King game, Neil Young, stated that the goal of the new game was to give you everything you felt like you missed in the last year's game, then increase the density of film imagery. This is why the game packs in over 20 minutes of film clips from the Return of the King movie and pulls off a distinct cinematic feel remarkably well for a game that is hobbled by the tech available in the early 2000s. Young stated that they took component pieces of the film and used them to recreate shots in real time in the game. This is why cutscenes have that really cool blending technique from film to, often hilarious, in-game models. The game also contains a variety of unlockable interviews with the cast that provided exclusive in-game audio. This includes Sir Ian McKellen,
the wisest of you will choose to be Gandalf.
Christopher Lee,
none can contend with the will of Saruman.
And the Hobbits, Elijah Wood,
I shall take up this terrible task.
Sean Astin,
The character that really comes through in the game is the kind of heroic fighting Sam.
Billy Boyd,
one of them being me, Pippin.
and Dominic Monaghan.
Our treat to you as a gamer.
The Hobbits would actually act as beta testers for the game, as they would get updated builds as development went along.
I've actually made the controller float, and without touching anything, I've managed to play the game. It's only happened a few times.
The producer of the game actually said that Dominic and Billy had tried to strong-arm the team into making their characters just a bit taller. Return of the King was also providing players with the ability to slay orcs with a friend, something that had been sorely missing from their previous outing. In a strange bit of honesty, Young, the producer, says that it's something we should have done and could have done in time for the previous game. Why it was omitted, we may never know. Return could also be played over the budding technology that was online multiplayer. However, online capability was only available for PS2 players, as the Xbox Live service hadn't caught enough traction in time for the release, and GameCube broadband only worked with just 6 games. Surprisingly, there was very little coverage of the handheld version. I wonder why. So now we know the backstory of the game, but how did it fare? What did the EGM staff think about Lord of the Rings Return of the King? Well, lucky for us, they gave us a review right in the back of the magazine itself, and it scored pretty decent in the three-headed monster that is the EGM review process, getting an 8.5, an 8.5, and an 8.0. However, despite being the cover game, Return of the King was outscored by other games in the issue, such as Prince of Persia: Sands of Time, SSX 3, ESPN NBA Basketball, NBA Live 04, Beyond Good and Evil, SOCOM 2, Ratchet & Clank Going Commando, Sega GT Online, Topspin, and the Game of the Month Mario Kart Double Dash. But review scores are neither here nor there. I can guarantee those other games had literally no involvement from Peter Jackson. And in the end of the day, isn't that what's important? Would you rather have a game with 10s across the board, or a game that had the guy that did the Frighteners behind you? Yeah, I think the work speaks for itself. And now it's time for some extra credits. While the cover story of these magazines are the main attraction, there are usually really cool articles listed throughout. In this issue of EGM, there is a really cool article called Hit Squad. We force 5 famous game makers to create the ultimate video game. In this article, they collaborated with 5 all-star game developers, who they go so far as to call the biggest names in gaming, to write a recipe for a surefire hit. To me, that sounds like too many cooks, but let's see what they come up with. It all begins with Peter Molyneux of Fable fame from Lionhead Studios. He is now on the run from police for fraud charges, I believe. And he starts the game with, a car speeds down a road with 2 vehicles in hot pursuit. Suddenly, the first car brakes to a halt and a man gets out. He looks tired and disheveled. Official FBI agent-looking men get out of the 2 other cars and approach. Then, in a commanding voice, the driver of the first car, you, the player, instructs the first FBI agent to shoot the second agent dead. This game is about you being on the run, but having the power, for short periods of time, to get anyone in the world to do what you want. You are the Persuader. That sounds, dumb, but let's continue. For a deeper dive into our character, we have Warren Spector from Ion Storm and the Deus Ex games. He says, "You are a being of godlike power, but it comes at a price. Each time you use your power, it hurts you physically and psychically. There's also a balance in the universe, so that for each friend you create, an enemy seems to come into existence, and there are other, less tangible costs to being a god. Because of your power, a variety of people, groups, and organizations, criminal enterprises, and even governments want you on their side, and they won't balk at using force to accomplish their goals. Bottom line, power to persuade is as much a curse as a blessing." Now for the enemies, we have Scott Peace from Neversoft. He says, "Government officers won't mind executing you, but corporate agents will try to bring you back using non-lethal force. Masked members of the so-called Trinity cult are your most dangerous opponents. They're too fanatical to be persuaded. Drug addicts and those lethally wounded are also immune to your powers. Animals cannot be controlled. You aren't unique either. Others gifted with similar abilities will also join the hunt. Thanks to regular TV broadcasts about your predicament, every pedestrian is also a potential threat. Drop your guard and you may be victimized by a regular Joe looking to become a local hero. Okay, so just everyone attacks you in GTA type setting, I guess. But more about the gameplay, we have Dave Perry of Shiny Entertainment. This says he worked on Enter the Matrix. He says, to keep the game freeform, the Persuader will have several possible offensive and defensive mind tricks. They involve you either killing enemies by making them do themselves in, or having someone else do it for you. Examples of prompting suicide include having someone leap off a cliff, impale themselves, feed themselves into a grinding machine, or walk into water while carrying a heavy weight. Some ways you could have enemies kill each other, have them strangle one another, crush friends using a heavy or moving object, put poison in a buddy's food, or drown a presumed friend. So, to Dave Perry, there are just a lot of heavy objects going around to crush and or drown yourselves with. And then to wrap it all up with the endings, we have Greg Thomas, the founder of Visual Concepts, who, this says his latest project was ESPN NFL Football. So, those NFL football games have some pretty engaging lore. He says, as the game comes to a close, there are whispers of soldiers and bombers on the horizon. A battle is coming, and it will be fought by two minds at war. In the end, you escape, powers intact and stronger than ever. But what lies ahead of you? How will you use your powers, and at what cost? You catch a woman eyeing your dirty clothes with contempt. You settle back in your seat and gaze outward as the Greyhound rolls anonymously along the stark interstate. Outside, the world and all its wickedness, all its wrongs waiting to be righted, stretches out before you. Roll credits. That was a wild ride. That was the fake game The Persuader, thrown together by 5 developers in the industry. If you have seen a game like The Persuader, let me know. I want to check that out. It sounds like PsyOps or something. And that's been a look under the cover of EGM December 2003. If you like this series, I'll probably do some more. We also post Let's Plays, reviews, news, everything else on our channel. So give us a like, a subscribe, check us out some more, and I'll be back with another Under the Covers.